Well, good morning, afternoon to everybody. I hope things are progressing along pretty well. This first slide, we got to talk about several Apollo missions. Now, please keep in mind that during the Apollo program, like I said before, not every single launch involved putting, men aboard or astronauts aboard. Sometimes they were sent to, just test and see if we can do this thing remote control. Yeah, a lot of money went into this thing because the whole country was very serious about it. But the Apollo 1 capsule uh, did not go into space, and as you can see on this slide, and there's a couple of YouTube links there. We lost people early on. I'd like to take more detail into this, but basically the capsule caught fire from the inside because they were using pure oxygen, no nitrogen mix. Now think back to what we've learned in Earth space science. The atmosphere on Earth, 70-ish% nitrogen. Well, they didn't have that mix. And so unlike when you light a match and the fire stays near the head of the match, that wasn't the case with the Apollo 1 capsule. They were just doing a ground test and they had pure oxygen in there, and there was a spark and they were cooked alive on the launch pad. Now, again, they were not getting ready to launch, but that was one of the first major accidents, and we learned a lot. Yeah, we learned a lot from that. So it was a really bad deal. But things progressed, and the program continued to move forward until Apollo 11 carried the first men to the moon, and that actually answers number 12. Okay, it was Apollo 11. Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin. You all have seen clips of that first step taken from one of the landing struts. You've heard about Apollo 13. That's a really good movie, which obviously we won't have time to watch, but if things would have moved along in class, we probably would have watched it and answered some questions about it. But Apollo 13 was one of those missions where things went very wrong once they got into space, and now we had to figure out how in the world do you get back, because the accident of Apollo 13 happened about almost a third of the way to the moon. So, you know, things were very precisely planned, and that created a whole big set of problems. But the big takeaway I wanted you to get for number 12 is Apollo 11 was the mission that first landed people on the moon. And there was some accessories that were used. They actually had a buggy. They called it the Lunar Rover. And that the key takeaway with that's the first vehicle made by man that was ever used on the surface of another world. And that actually answers number 13. Okay, the Lunar Rover. And I think there's 3 or 4 of these that were used, and they're actually still on the moon. Yeah. Now, okay, if you were to go to the moon and find some of these different things, in fact, there's a lot of things still left on the moon, but if you were to find them, a mature person, a grown person, would have to ask himself, am I messing with a historically significant thing here, and do I want to mess with it? Or do I take an extra battery, plug it in the buggy, and go for a ride? I know what half of you would say. So, yeah. So, in fact, there's some stuff still on the moon. There's a lot of stuff still on the moon. We have actually polluted that landscape pretty well. 60 probes between the two biggest countries, that were involved in this, the U.S. and the Soviet Union. 10 descent stages. What did those look like? Well, that's the bottom part of the capsule that actually lands on the moon. And there's a picture of that in the upper right. There's a part that actually touches the moon, and then there's another part that sits on top of that where all the astronauts ride. And when it comes down on the moon, it's as a one. But the descent stage that has the landing gear you can see there, it stays on the moon, and the command module pops up. It lifts, it fires off of that. That stays on the moon. So, we've had 6 missions to the moon, and so the bottom parts are still there. 3 moon buggies. There we go. 2 golf balls. Alan Shepard, remember that name? He left 2 golf balls on the moon, and a family picture by Charles Duke. left it on the moon. So there's some stuff there that if you are one of those explorers, in the future, and somebody's got to do it, why not you? You have to stop and think about, what am I going to do with this stuff? So, not nearly enough time went into the Apollo missions. We really needed to spend a couple of days on it, really looking at it, because it was a huge achievement for America and something that brought a lot of national pride. And just as a personal note, the first Star Trek series, Kirk, Spock, McCoy, and all that, came out during this time. So people were considering the possibility of not only being in space but living in space. There were some other things that went on in terms of space exploration. This is an unmanned probe, obviously, launched in 1958. This was America's response to Sputnik. Okay, this model was launched about 74 different times, and it's conducted different studies throughout the years. So obviously we've shifted over to a different type of rocket, but this is a type that has gone on. That wraps it up for this, and I believe we touched on 14.